Welcome to our first MTSS Community of Practice. I'm really excited that we can offer these and have this be a format that we can come together and talk about, explore those topics of interest and network as educators across Montana. Nora, I'm so thrilled to have Dr. Nora Barney as our presenter today. She is the principal at Lincoln Primary School in Anaconda District. Prior to becoming an administrator, she was a special education teacher working in grades K through 12. And I was introduced to Nora through Jody Bartz from MSU. Jody and I are in quite a few different committees together, and she told me about this incredible work that is going on in Anaconda. So Nora, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Thanks, Sheila. Very sweet. All right, everybody. Can I get a thumbs up just to make sure that you can see my screen? I think if Sheila, if you could do that, because you're the only one I can see right now. So that'd be great. Thank you. So I'm going to do this pretty quick. I'm going to leave quite a bit of time for questions because I know that there's lots of questions. Like Sheila said, I am a principal in Anaconda. I do have a background in special education. This is my 8th year so far in Anaconda. When I started, I inherited some things which are probably pretty similar to the schools that you guys are working in. So I'm just going to speak about our experience and some things that I've learned over the 8 years of being here, and just literally starting from scratch and trying to figure out how to do things the right way. And we'll go from there. My background is in special education. I'm a former SPED teacher. I spent 11 years in the classroom, and then I transitioned into administration as a half-time assistant principal, half-time SPED teacher. So it was a really nice balance. And then became a principal here in Anaconda. My kind of expertise, if you want to say, is in leadership in early childhood settings. And then just intervention in general fascinates me. So I'm always trying to learn a little bit more about how to do things differently with kids. Lately, it's been on math and social emotional learning. And of course, reading's always there, but reading's always the easiest. So I think how we'll do this today, if anybody has a question while I'm presenting, just go ahead and unmute yourself and just ask. I'll stop and I'll answer it. I will leave time at the end for questions, but if something pops up and you really want to know the answer, just unmute yourself and ask. There's not too many on here, and I don't think it'll be a big deal. So feel free to do that. All right, so we are going to keep going. So what I'd like everybody to do is just pop in the chat right now. If you could just type in what is something that is your biggest challenge with implementing MTSS. So if you can just go ahead and pop that in the chat and let me know what is the biggest challenge you have with implementing MTSS in your building or school or districts or whatever it is. Coordinating services, absolutely. Buy-in, yeah. Data collection to measure effectiveness. Helping schools find time, yes. Time is the commodity, and there's some craftiness you need to do. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Communication with all staff, absolutely. Administrators to come on board, yes, absolutely. Consistency across grade levels. Good. So we're going to talk a little bit about all those things today. Kind of the biggest thing is I'm going to talk you through kind of our experience that we had here in Lincoln and some things that I learned along the way. So beginning admin, not really knowing what to do or how to do it. I had to learn along with everybody else because I knew what was happening wasn't working. And so I had to become a learning leader, I guess, per se. And so that's just something that I'll share with you today, kind of my experiences that we did, and then things that I do during our PLC meetings to shut down the negativity. I know that's a hard thing. You'll get negative comments. And so I'll talk you through maybe some scripts that I use, that I talked myself through before I had a meeting. And I'll talk you through just some other processes that we use just to look at data, analyze data, and have clear communication across the building and across the grade level. So those things will be addressed today. We're back here. All right. So what we're going to do today is you're going to learn about my journey. I'm going to share some tips and tricks. We're going to talk about roadblocks because you will experience roadblocks for sure. And then we're going to talk about negative comments and how to shut them down. So keep in mind, this journey has taken 8 years. This is my eighth year in a preschool through second grade building. So it was not perfect. I inherited a school that was it's supposed to be 53%. So I apologize. 53% of their kids were tier 1 according to their reading data. 19% were tier 2 and 28% was tier 3. So it was a pretty at-risk building. When I interviewed for the position, I was told that yes, we have grade levels. Yes, we have interventions. We are totally an RTI school because at the time, the big terminology was RTI. So yes, we are totally an RTI school. But in fact, we weren't. So we had grade levels, but they were the most awkward meetings you could ever attend in your entire life. They were like crickets. You'd sit around a table. People would stare at each other. They felt threatened. They felt as though they were being judged. It was not a positive experience. So yeah, we had grade levels. We maybe had them 4 times a year because everyone hated them and no one knew what to do. So yep, there were grade levels. They did assess students, but they didn't assess them properly. They would, just do the assessment to check the box, but there wasn't any like documentation to be like, this is the specific things I did for 2 weeks straight to make sure that I actually can say that this intervention is working or not. So they would be like, oh yeah, we progress monitor, but there was no system in place to track it. And then every teacher did have an intervention time, but here's the thing. I inherited a building where each teacher got to just pick what they wanted to do during the day. So, yep, they had reading and math and science and intervention, all those classes, they definitely had them, but they got to pick and choose when they did that. The only thing that was on there that was like set by the previous building admin was their prep, their special time for their kids. And so what would happen would be like the interventionists or the title teachers at the time, they would just kind of like an old resource model. They would just pick a time to just show up, and it might not be every day because I can't quite fit it in, and I can't take your kids today because you're doing art. There was no consistency, but they had intervention, right? It just wasn't the way we knew it should work. It was a pretty toxic place, a lot of negativity, and because of that toxicity, there was a lot of challenging behavior. So we had a lot of things we had to fix, and honestly, I had no idea what.
Is there anyone on here that you can think of anything that I know she's just started talking about some of the challenges that she's had? What are some challenges that you faced or that you are currently facing in your MTSS implementation? Putting you on the spot, I realize.
Sheila, this is Keith Hoyer. How are you doing?
Good. I'm hanging in there.
Good. Yeah, I think it's reading through what people wrote in the chat, the consistency across grade levels. I see that a lot, even in some of the other schools I've talked to. And when she was talking about the grade level teams, I thought that was kind of interesting because, yeah, do you have a grade level team, and are they, what are they working for interventions? That consistency across the board is, I think, a challenge. So if anybody on here wants to say or give us an idea of how they handle that problem, that'd be great. I work with Holly up in Havre. Holly, you on?
I am.
Yeah. Tell us a little bit about what you guys are doing. I see you guys just finished up the SAS too.
We are really lucky. We're very consistent because I'm only at a 2nd and 3rd grade school. So that makes it really easy. But I think probably one of the best things that we did a few years ago is we came up with a user guide for everything that we do. And in it, we wrote down the benchmarks, the cut scores, here's our flow chart for behavior, here's absolutely everything, because we had all these practices in place. But as we transitioned staff members in and out of the team, or people moved to different areas or just needed a break, everything we thought we knew, once we wrote it down, we thought, oh, there's some really good discussion points here, and that has helped extremely with our consistency by just having all of our practices in a written format.
Yeah, that's perfect, Holly. I love your guys' behavior plan, your flow chart. That's really kind of cool. I'll have to look at the rest of your plan. That's really cool though that you guys did that. That really does help. And that's going to provide that consistency piece too.
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. Genevieve, did you have something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm a school psychologist working up in the Flathead Valley, and I support a number of schools. And I think just this question on consistency and grade level teams, there's just so many models for how the problem solving happens. Like, do grade level teams own most of that decision making? Do you have a tier 2 team and a tier 3 team? Do you have an academics team and a behavior team? And there's pros and cons to all of those models. But I think, and I have support schools that are doing it differently. I'm just kind of constantly trying to think about what's the most efficient model for problem solving and what results in the most consistency for kids.
Great point. So what are some of the other schools use for your guys' model? Like, so you guys use, what model do you guys use up in Kalispell on the Flathead?
So I support several schools here, and they're all different. So I have a school that has a tier 2 team and a tier 3 team that I sit on both of those, and we do like data analysis and problem solving. I have another school that I support where it's kind of a combination of myself and grade level teams doing a lot of the problem solving. And I'm not currently supporting, but I have supported schools that have an academic team and a behavior team.
Oh, perfect.
Mm-hmm.
I see Nora's back.
Hi guys, sorry. Like I got kicked off and so I had just connected to a hotspot. So welcome to rural America, right? So sorry about that. Do you want me to just continue? Keep going? Okay. All right, we will try the, Sheila, I need you to turn off the screen sharing thing. Try it again. Oh, here we go. Okay, hopefully we're there. Yes, okay. All right, guys. So thank you for your patience. Hopefully we don't get kicked off again. I'll do my best. All right, so let's just dive right in. And we'll see what happens. So the one thing I would really recommend to every single person on this session today is you really need to have a really strong leadership team. I realized really quickly that there were people in the building that knew that there were right and wrong ways to do things, and they knew that they needed to have more consistency. And so I just went to those people, figured out who they were, and just highlighted their strengths. So you can't do it alone. You got to have other people with you. So if you're an instructional coach, or you're a building admin, you have to have more than just you, because it's not going to work. You have to have people that help spread the philosophy and also shut down the negativity. So when we start our PLCs, what we do, this is just like a basic agenda. And so one of the things that we do is we always celebrate. And I'll talk a little bit more about celebrations in a bit and kind of what type of questions I ask and prompt for the teachers to reflect on. Then the next thing we do is we review data. And then I always prompt some reflective questions. Now, it doesn't always have to be the building admin. It can be anybody, on the team, but I've already spent the time looking at the data. So I know what I want the grade levels to get to, but I want them to get to it. I don't want to be the one that tells them, if that makes sense. So I'm trying to ask reflective questions, knowing full well what I believe needs to happen. And maybe there's other ideas that the grade levels have, but I always make sure that I ask these kind of type of reflective questions. So when we look at the data, we look at, what does the grade level data tell you? So you don't just look at your own data, you look at everyone's data. That was very hard to start with because people, again, felt judged. What does your grade level need to work on? How do you know? And you just look at everyone's data. Does one group have more strengths than others? And what gains were made with each group? And so you would talk through all those things based on the data that is there. Then after we do those things, we update our sorting folder. And here is a link to we use for reading, we use How Do I Plan and Teach Reading Groups. And so if you go to this site, you can click on any of these links and they'll pull up a way to sort kids. Hopefully you guys can see that. I'm not sure when I click on new tabs if it works. Nope. So it goes right here. And so you just click on one of these links and it'll sort it for you. And so that's really our like bread and butter of how we do this. Hopefully it works this time. Yes, it will. So if you look at second grade, this is how you sort your kids. You do it on composite scores and then you put them in the first column. So this column over here is group A. This is your most at-risk group. Group B is your second at-risk, group C and group D. Someone's in the chat. Will this be recorded to you later? Yes, it is being recorded. So we go through and we sort our data based on whatever tool you decide, and there's a lot out there. That's just what we use. And I'll be honest, we actually have changed this sorting because we have found that the needs in our community kind of dictate that we move in a different direction. And so we make sure that we've actually altered that. It was a good place to start and it helped us move forward, but we needed to move a little different. Then we repeat that exact same process with math and social emotional. Reading's, of course, always the easiest. It was the one that we started with, and then we added in math and social emotional, but same process follows. And then we determine when the intervention cycle is going to start and when it's going to end, but we do not make a single decision without data. No decision. So teachers can't come into my office and say, I need to send this kid to intervention. I'll say, where's the data? And I'll say, oh, you can't do that. We haven't had a grade level. Let's think through some other interventions and things like that. So nothing is changed. Nothing happens without anything in front of me. So let's talk about celebration. So when we start the meeting, all the teachers know that we're going to have a celebration or we're going to reflect. So sometimes, sometimes it'll be a question about data. What do you want to celebrate about your kids' data? Or maybe it's about something that they want to celebrate in their life. Maybe there's a new grandkid or someone's expecting or, something like that. But then sometimes I'll ask different questions just to switch it up and kind of catch them off guard a little bit. So, and it also helps just with the camaraderie within each grade level. So maybe it kind of lets people take down their guard a little bit. So these are just some examples, like what's one piece of advice, I'd give to a newborn or you give to a newborn, or if you could talk to your teenage self, what was the one thing that you would tell them? And these are just, interesting ways to just have the teachers talk to each other so that they, start with, just a way to kind of break down those barriers, because in the beginning, very defensive, right? Because they feel like everyone's being judged. So first and foremost, the grade levels that we used to have would be the teachers just holding their data close to their chest and not wanting to share everyone's data. And that was something that had to change. So if we are going to have a true discussion about our tier 1 instruction, we have to see everyone's data. So everyone sees everyone's data. There's no secrets in these meetings. And the first time we did it, I think that it was really positive, but it was probably the hardest thing I did as an administrator, because there was a fine line between people feeling judged and making sure that the tone of the meeting stayed focused on kids and not judging teachers. So it was really important to do that. And once I did it, it was great, but it took me a while to kind of build up the backbone to do that. So full disclosure, I wish I would have done that earlier. So that's my first thing. So the first thing we're going to do, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at some data. Okay. And I took off the kids' names and it's just benchmark data. And the first one's going to be first sound fluency. So I'm sure a lot of you guys know what that assessment is. The kids are given a word and then they have to say what the first sound is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 2 graphs, and I want you to think through what do these graphs tell you about this particular pod or classroom. So you're just looking at it, you're wanting to know, okay, what is it? There's going to be a gray line across the bar. First sound fluency, we only test first the middle of the year. We don't test it after, except we'll progress monitor if kids haven't met the goal. So as you're looking at the data, I want you to think through, okay, we know that first sound fluency is a foundational reading skill. So as I'm looking at these 2 pods, what is this data telling me about each pod? And I'm going to tell you that there's some secrets to each one. And I know that information because, of course, I'm in the building, but you don't. So I'm going to let you take a look at them. They are different. And then we're going to just kind of get on the chat and see if we can figure it out. So here's the first group. So I'll give you just a couple seconds to look. The blue dots are the beginning of the year benchmark, and then of course the pink squares are the middle of the year. So I'll just give you 30 seconds to look at it, see if you can have any epiphanies about the data. Okay, and then I'm going to show you the second class. Same thing. Beginning of the year, mid-year. All right, and then what I'd like you guys to do is just pop in the chat and let me know, like, what are your initial thoughts? What do you think about this data? What is this data telling you? If you were to look at it in one of your, PLC meetings or a grade level, what would it tell you? So, hold on. So what I do when I'm looking at this data, the first time is I literally did the exact same thing you did. This class, this very first class has made a ton of growth. We had kids that were at 0 and now are, above where they need to be. And but there's also kids that made minimal growth. And then of course, the second class didn't make as much growth. Like even if you just look, if you look at the first graph and you just keep your eyes on the gray, you'll see a lot more dots and lines. And then you look at the next one and there's very few. Okay, so here's what I'm gonna tell you. This class has not been quarantined this school year, not one time. The teacher has been there every day. The interventionist has been there every day. So very consistent with our intervention, very consistent with what's happening. They're very reflective, both of them. Okay, this class was quarantining twice this school year. The interventionist was not able to be there every day because she's a teacher that had to be pulled to cover classrooms. So the choice was, close the building or find bodies to cover classrooms. And so we chose to keep the kids in the building. And you can tell that that made a huge impact on these kids. And so that's just the dynamic I want to show you. Also, the other thing I want to show you is the kids that are kind of right here towards the right side that have very little gains. These two students right here, these are remote learners. So those students made very little gains. And in this class, the students that went backwards, those students are remote learners as well. Absolutely, like, this graph absolutely tells you consistency and fidelity, and having someone in the room every day, it absolutely speaks to that. Absolutely. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to take a look at oral reading fluency. So another assessment, this is second grade. So I'm going to show you two different classes, same thing. The gray is for the end of the year. So the goal is 87 words per minute at the end of second grade. And then I'm going to show you a second class. So this is the first class. And then I'm going to show you the second class. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and flip to that next class so you guys can kind of see. All right, and then if you guys just want to go ahead and put your thoughts, I know that we're super quick. I'm going to go back really quick just so you can see that first one because they are very different. And then I'll go ahead and let you put your thoughts in each. Good question. Does the intervention match the deficit area? Good question. Bigger discrepancies in first and second. Yep. Lot bigger discrepancies. What about accuracy prior to fluency? Yep. So one of the things that we did with each of these pods, because they were pods. So normally in a normal non-COVID year, what would happen is we would sit at a meeting and we'd pull kids with similar, needs and have them go to intervention. But they would come from different classrooms or different pods, but we're not able to do that this year. So you take a look at this first class. This first class has a lot of needs, Just looking at the data, beginning of the year, blue dot data, you see this and you're like, oof, we got a lot of needs in this class, right? And then you go to this graph and you're like, okay, definitely made more gains, a lot higher readers in terms of fluency. I know someone put a comment on there about accuracy. Absolutely. We have kids that can read very, very well. We're in the 40, 50, 60, 70 range. And so what's our accuracy like? Because accuracy is way more important than how many words you can read a minute. Yep. So we absolutely looked at that and we determined what we needed to do. So in this first class, this very first graph that I showed you, there was more students on IEPs in this class, which explains a little bit, not really though, a little bit of the lack of gains, but we did make changes after we met the very first time. So I'll talk about those in a second. And then this second class had actually more students that started the year as non-readers. So if you look down here, there was way more students that we had to go back to our phonological awareness and our CBC work because they could maybe string a couple of words together, but they weren't understanding what they were doing, and they definitely had some issues in that department. So we had to kind of back up a little bit. Also, a lot of these kids, their scores were very low entering the school year in both classrooms. Very, very, very low. These kids missed the magical time of first grade, which all of us know first grade is so important for reading. And so we really had to take a step back and be like, okay, what skills did they miss in first grade that we need to go back and teach? And so one teacher, obviously focused a little bit better than the other. More students on IEPs than the other class, but doesn't matter. We don't use that as an excuse. So here's what we did. So currently what we did with this class is we have a staggered start time so that we don't cross pods when kids arrive. So we have students that come to school between 8 and 8:30, and depending on your grade, that's when you arrive to school. But the staff is all here. So what we did is we contacted these parents and we said, is there any way you can drop your kid off at 7:45? We're going to feed him breakfast from 7:45 to 8. And then from 8 to 8:30, we're going to start doing intervention with your kid. We're going to give them an additional intervention. So what we did is we just said, okay, we are not meeting these kids' needs. Let's look at specific data so that we can determine what it is we're going to focus on. So whether it was our phonological awareness or whether or not it was fluency or accuracy, we try to target these kids with more time because, again, time is an issue. And so that was something that the interventionist came up with. That wasn't me. I just said, it's not working. What do you guys think we should do? And they all said, let's do this instead. And so that's what those teachers ended up doing. In this classroom, the change that was made is that, all these kind of middle pink ones, these 50 to 80 kids, we're pretty confident that they're going to make the needed gains necessary. So that teacher talked a little bit about accuracy in her class. And she also talked a lot about wanting to do some novels. So we started to purchase some novels and she's starting to do novel studies. And then these kids right here, those are the students that are, non-reading, for lack of a better term. And so we changed an intervention for this very low one, started with doing SIPs. SIPS wasn't working. We didn't feel as though we were making the gains that we needed, and we felt like the teacher was teaching to fidelity. So we switched that student, and that student's doing reading mastery. And then this student right here gets additional time in the morning one-on-one, because again, we feel like the skills are there, they just need more time. So we made that change right away so that student could get more time. And then so that was part of it. So those are changes that we made. So little things just to think about. So when we look at data as a group, those are very similar things that I asked the teachers to do. So I asked them to look at all their data and talk about the growth. So why are kids above the line in this class? What do you attribute that growth? And then the teachers say, well, you know, we've been doing 6-minute fluency, or I really think that this instructional strategy has helped a lot. And I wasn't doing choral reading before, but then I switched to it and I see that that really helped, whatever. But they have to be self-reflective on it. And if they can't come up with anything because they're crickets, and sometimes that happens, then I just prompt them with, you know, I was in your classroom the other day and I noticed this. Do you think that had something to do with that? And that helps with people feeling safe. And then also talking about intervention materials and making sure that the materials are there and readily available. And then we talk about the kids below the line. And the kids below the line, that's usually where the judgmental statements come from. Oh, I'm wondering about the 2 students off the chart who dropped. Kim, I'm going to go back to that and see really quick. Oh, the ones at the top, those 2 are remote learners. Those ones right there, those 2 are remote learners. That's why. Because that we were like, oh, they're above, but they dropped, so they're remote. Sorry. Oh, got it. Okay, so when you get to the questions about the kids below the line, this is where you're going to get those judgmental statements and those statements of defense. So you have to be prepared for them. So make sure you're prepared for those statements, because you have to challenge them. Otherwise, nothing's going to move forward. So we talk about what some ideas that the whole group can have. What do you believe they need to be successful? And does anyone have any ideas to share? But this is where those judgmental statements, they're challenged and they're not allowed. And once you do it 1 or 2 times, then you're not going to have issues with it, and the staff will realize, okay, that's not allowed here, and it'll stop. But you have to definitely do it. And then, you know, throughout the year, so, you know, after progress monitoring or something, a teacher will, you know, get a pin out, and they'll, you know, make dots on these graphs. And this is an old one, but I wanted you guys to see that so the teachers do know that, like, when we progress monitor every 2 weeks, they're able to take a look and see the gains that the kids are making. So the next step that we do after we have that data discussion is we update our data folders. And so all the teachers have data folders. We have a data folder for reading, and we try to tie it to social emotional learning. And then math is kind of a separate beast. And so that one is a separate document. So as you go ahead and you just look at reading, the kids on the left are the kids that are most at risk. And the kids on the right are the kids that are less at risk, or more towards grade level, I guess I would say. The kids on the far right, those are the kids that are at grade level. The kids in the middle here, those are the kids that we need to watch, but probably will be okay as long as we continue to monitor them. They could drop down over here, so it's really important that we maintain that. And then the things up here, those are the things that we specifically do during intervention for reading. And there are things that we have here, and then social emotional learning, I'll show you that in a bit and what that looks like. So these are the specific things that we do for 2nd grade for each of those groups. So if you're on the far left of the folder, these are the activities that we do, and they come straight out of that book. And again, we've modified a lot of these over the years, but this is a really good place to start. They come out of that How Do I Teach a Reading Group book, and I'm going to show it to you. But so there's that. And then, so that's for reading. And then the other thing we do is we talk about math. And so these are some specific things that we do for math. And math is harder this year. We have a lot less time, but we still make sure that we have a minimum of like 10 to 15 minutes to focus on math. And so these are some things that we need to do for math, and that comes from MAP. And then for social emotional learning, these are the things that we look at for social emotional. So we do the same process with social emotional. We look at the assessment. We go every 2 weeks, or sorry, not every 2 weeks, but we target these kids, and we make sure that we're addressing their needs. So these are some ideas for self-regulation, and then these are some ideas for the 8 competencies for social emotional learning. And the kids are, so the teachers fill out a checklist, for lack of a better term, on their students, similar to a BASC, but it's not like that. And then we fill out that, and then it gets scored, and then we determine which area we need to target, and that's how we target for social emotional learning. So there's that. So here are some keys to my success. So the first thing is that we're going to talk about ownership. You have to talk about group size. We're going to talk about the culture shift that's needed. You need to think about the roadblocks that you're going to have happen and be prepared for them. Think 10 steps ahead of your staff or the group of teachers that you're working with, and you need to be prepared for them, because when someone says something in a staff meeting or in your PLC meeting and you can't answer it, it's not going to go well. So you got to make sure that you think through those. Be prepared to shut down those negative comments, and everyone needs to understand the data. I know in some schools, a lot of teachers don't assess their kids. Like sometimes it's an instructional coach, or sometimes it's an aide or an interventionist. I really recommend that the teachers actually assess their own students, only because then they show ownership of the data, and it's not just the special ed teacher's job to test the kids, or it's not the special ed teacher's job to catch the kids up. So I really recommend that. Before, that's what happened in our building. The interventionist would do the assessment, and I stopped that because the teachers didn't understand what the data was telling them, because they didn't have to do it. They didn't have to assess the kids. So we stopped doing that. So let's talk about ownership. Yes, we progress monitor every 2 weeks. We do complete some forms that the teachers fill out, and they do turn them into me. I do look at them, and I make sure that I comment to them after they've turned them into me. And it takes forever, but I'm telling you, it's totally worth it. So you look at your most at-risk kids, you make a comment to the teacher like, oh my gosh, you did a really good job working on, these CBC words. What's next? What are you going to do next? And so it's really important that you follow up. So it's not just paperwork that they're turning in and you're checking the box. And so just really make sure that you do that. And the teachers know that you're looking at them, and they'll appreciate that, because then they'll come to you for questions and go from there. You have to be an engaged leader. Definitely want to know what's happening. Like, I don't want to ever be blindsided in a PLC meeting with a grade or a classroom that is really struggling. Like that kindergarten classroom, we knew was going to struggle because that staff member had to be pulled. And we have made changes this quarter to make sure that those changes, if we have to do that again, that class won't be affected. And what we did is we pulled the librarian and the PE teacher and the enrichment teacher and said, okay, you're now helping that classroom with intervention. So we kind of doubled down on things to make sure that those kids' needs were being met. So some ideas to provide support to your staff would be to just have the resources available. So when you're sitting at a data meeting, you need to make sure that the things that you know that are needed are right there. So if you want your staff to do 40 to 50 CBC words or to focus on fluency, have everything right there. So you're going to have, your 6-minute fluency books right there that have lists of CBC words, or you're going to have novels readily available that are appropriate for those kids. If you give them the tools, there's no reason that they shouldn't be able to do it. And then there's no excuses. So you're taking away that whole excuse thing. And it is a lot of work, but it's totally worth it. And it's worth it. And the staff will appreciate the effort that has been put in for that. And then if you don't have time or you need things to be gathered, then you need to be able to put that on someone to be like, okay, this is what I need you to do. And I need it done by this date. And then you need to follow up on it. And staff need to know what they're doing for intervention. When we first started, it was like, yeah, we have intervention, but they didn't know what they were doing. They would sit in the room and maybe do the same thing that they did earlier in the day. They really didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. So it's really important that there be a list of things that the teachers know that they're supposed to do, because otherwise it's pointless. And they need to understand that these things are going to affect this. And so you need to make sure that you're following up on that. Make sure that you have ideas ready and be prepared to cover for a struggling teacher. So if you have a teacher who is really struggling with a certain strategy, be prepared to cover for that teacher so that that teacher can go to a colleague's room and observe that and then come back and try it in the classroom. telling someone and showing someone are two different things, and talking through it with them and showing them a piece of paper that goes over the strategy. Some teachers can do that, but some really need a visual, and some really need to be able to see it. And so if they see it, then they're more likely to try it. And remember that with kids, we remember that all behavior is communication. So for our kids, if a kid's struggling, we're like, okay, something's going on, we struggle. But with teachers, I think we need to remember that as well, because we all have staff that, vent and need to come in our office and have a moment, but they're trying to tell us something. They're trying to tell us that they don't know what to do, that they need support, or they don't feel listened to. And so just keep an eye on that. I used to not take the time to really visit with the teachers, and now I really need to, because if I don't, then it boils over into the PLC meetings. And so it's really important to just find time to check in. And if someone's struggling, or you hear of someone struggling, to go and see what's going on, because that it means something. Our intervention groups, you need to keep them small. And so this year, I have intervention groups that are 3 to 4, just because of the size of the rooms and because of COVID restrictions, but no more than 6, never more than 6. If you have to, based on the year and based on the demographics, 10, but you're not going to make as many gains. So we do try to keep our intervention groups small. You see more movement with small intervention groups, kids leave intervention faster, and the teachers are able to focus. And it also puts a lot more on the classroom teacher. So the classroom teacher needs to start differentiating more in their classroom, because maybe we just don't have room for all the kids in the intervention. So we try to be really creative there. The next thing we do is we really maximize our resources. So the following people do intervention in our schools. So I have instructional aides. So instructional aides are the individual that, so the state mandates that any class over 20 in grades K through 3 have an instructional aide for 90 minutes. And so what we do is, I don't put that aide in that classroom stapling papers or making copies or doing art projects. That instructional aide is in the hallway or in the classroom working with kids individually. And so we'll make a list of kids that don't know their letter names, or a list of kids that need a little bit more time with fluency. And that instructional aide will go through and they will work with those kids in that classroom. And if another class has overage, then that individual will go to that classroom as well. But we put them to work and we train them, and it's not a wasted body. Like, you're going to do something, and everything you do has a purpose. And so we make sure we maximize them. I maximize the SPED staff. So the special ed staff, I'm really creative with the schedule. I make sure that I group kids that are on IEPs in similar rooms, so that the case manager of those students can go in the classroom and serve them. And then if necessary, those students would also go to intervention with that SPED teacher based on minutes on IEPs. But we make sure that we maximize all of that. So if I happen to have a student that needs a one-on-one aid, I will put other students in that classroom as well, so that that one-on-one aid can not only teach their child, for lack of a better term, but they will also teach a group of students as well. So during small groups, when all the teachers are doing intervention within their reading block, then that para is also doing it as well. If it works out, depends on the type of kid that you have, but we definitely make sure that we maximize that resource. Counselors, we definitely use our counselors. So I have one counselor in the building, and she helps run our social emotional learning groups. She does it in conjunction with our special ed staff. And so she makes sure that, if kids need social emotional learning minutes, that those kids go to the SPED staff. If they don't need social emotional learning minutes, then of course they go to her. But she does groups, and that's what she does all day long. She's doing social emotional learning all day long. And once a month, she's in the classroom teaching her counseling lessons. But for the most part, she's doing intervention for social emotional learning. And then of course, you use your CSCT people, if you happen to have them in your building, to do your most at-risk kids. And so if you have a group of kids that flag for social emotional learning on your assessments, then you can, of course, have the kids that are qualifying for CSCT services go with those individuals, or you can have them, go with your counselor or your SPED staff. So we just seriously maximize every single person that we can. So when we think about the schedule is extremely important, because you have to think through who has extra time in their schedule. Sometimes it's the PE teacher. So my building is the PE teacher, the librarian, and the enrichment teacher. because all of the prep schedules are tied together. And so we have to make sure that we maximize their time. And so this year, like I said, I started to make them interventionists. So the PE teacher teaches a second grade intervention group, a first grade and a kindergarten. The enrichment teacher, same thing. And the librarian does kindergarten and second. So we put them to work, you know, and so I teach them how to do it. And in years past, it was always if it was necessary, but we just maximize everyone's time. And then we kind of think through, okay, we need to alter the building schedule to make it work. So when I inherited the school, like I said, they just had a special schedule. And I think that special schedule was like 45 minutes per class or something. And so I had to change it to 30, because if I didn't change it to 30 minutes, then we weren't going to be able to meet the kids' needs. And so that was just something that we had to do. Okay. So that's just something to think through a little bit. And then of course we progress monitor, and then the social emotional learning happens after 6 to 8 weeks of intervention, because social emotional learning is different, and it doesn't move as quickly as reading and math. That's something that we make sure that we do. In terms of the culture shift, we just have to make sure that we're challenging the negative statements. So if you think about the judgment-free discussions, I always have to reflect, okay, if the teacher is trying to blame the student for the lack of a skill, then I have to constantly think through, okay, is the teacher missing a skill? Is the intervention wrong for the group? And I just have to remember, judgment's not helping kids, but that teacher's telling me something and I gotta figure out what it is. So the next thing that we need about is just those roadblocks. So, you just got to be prepared for them. So of course, like you're going to hear comments like, I don't have time for this. When am I going to test these kids and do all this paperwork? I don't have time to do it. And so that will come up. And so you just answer it by saying, I agree. It is going to take time. I know that, but I know that you do things within your school day that you don't need to do. For example, in second grade, I know that calendar is not a standard. So how about instead of doing calendar, you do this instead? Or I know that in day 3 of our reading program, it is the 3rd time that they've read the anthology story. That seems like a really good time that you could assess your students. Or day 5, which is a really light day. So I just always try to combat it. And then I always try and come back and say, what do you think about that? Or does someone have another idea? Like, here's the expectation. If you don't like my suggestion, then come up with an idea so that you can meet it. Another one that will come up is he can do it. He's just lazy. He just, that score's not accurate. He does really good. It's just not accurate. He's just lazy. And so then you got to say, do you really think this kid is lazy? Because no kid comes to school and is purposely to do poorly on an assessment. If they could do it, they would. So the skill just isn't solid and it hasn't been taught yet. So just admit that and let's move forward. Because that will come up and you have to be able to challenge it and just confidently say to them, this is what I'm going to do. Another one will be, she's never here and our home's a mess. It's crazy there. I doubt she can learn anything. And it's like, okay, well, we can't control what happens at home, but what can we control here? Okay, you're going to say that, but we can't control it. So you got to let it go. So what can we control? And probably the most famous one is that, well, they're not making games because they're on IEPs. They're all special. They're not going to make games. And so my statement to that is you know what? If you continue to expect your kids to do less, then they will. And because they have a label on them, then they're going to continue to do less. But if you have higher expectations for them, they're going to be fine. And I remember at the last meeting, you agreed to do this. You just simply chose not to. So next time when I look at your stuff, I'm sure I'll see that you actually chose to do it. So you just gotta challenge it. It's hard, and you just gotta do it. The biggest thing is the schedule. So my advice about the schedule is this. Put it on your staff, put it on the leadership, put it on the group of teachers and just say, okay, get with your building admin and say, what are the non-negotiables? So here are my non-negotiables. You have to have 30 minutes of reading a day, intervention a day. You have to have 45 minutes of small group intervention, at least 15 minutes. So this year it's 15 minutes because that's all you can fit in. Social emotional learning has to happen 1 day a week. Preps have to be a minimum of 30 minutes because that's what your contract states. You can't use the gym from this time to this time, and all the grade level teachers have to have the same prep. so that they can plan together. Have to have the same prep. Those are my non-negotiables. I walk out of the room, the teachers build the schedule. So this is our non-COVID schedule, and this is for second grade. So you see that we do make time to have a classroom family time, and this is where the teachers start to build those connections with their kids. Then there's the reading block, language arts, recess, specials, intervention. Then you see math and math intervention, specials, and then the end of the day. This year, however, because we're on a COVID year, this is what it looks like. Breakfast is in the classroom, lunch is in the classroom. We have small group, whole group. Reading and math intervention were put together because we wanted to just be as efficient as we possibly could. And so we tried to link it together. Sometimes the kids that go to intervention aren't flagged for math intervention. So of course they would go back, but we tried to be as creative as we possibly could and try to keep the same kids there, but you can't fix that. And then social emotional learning happens on a Wednesday. The SEL classroom lesson happens during the classroom family time because the teachers also teach an SEL lesson. The science and social studies are addressed during small groups and during specials, and art happens whenever we can fit it in as best we can. There's some frequently asked questions, but we're just about out of time. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open it up for any questions that people have, and I'll do my best to answer them. I'm not sure that I'm perfect on anything, but I can just tell you kind of my experience and what we've done. So I'm happy if you want to unmute, or you can get in the chat and type something down if you'd like. I think the biggest advice I can give everybody on this call is just the communication circle. So when you sit in a meeting and you make a decision, you need to make sure that that's streamlined to every single person. So when you have your PLC meetings, everybody that works with that grade level needs to be in the room. So don't have a meeting with not everybody in the room, and that will help the communication thing. Because of COVID, we have to do our meetings after school. Normally, I would get subs for all the staff and I'd put them in, and sometimes it would be 8-10 staff because that's how many teachers would work with those kids, and we would do them on half days. But just as much as you can, because that communication is huge, make sure everybody's in the room, because the hardest thing is someone has to be responsible to follow up with all the other staff, and I'll forget or someone will forget or it's not going to be explained correctly, and so it's just easier to make them all be in the room.
Nora, I really liked what you said about the team-based leadership model. One thing I have a question: are you guys district-wide then with this, or just within your school?
Yeah, so I would say that our school, the pre-K through second is, and then the 3rd through 6th grade is really, they just recently started working on this about 2 years ago, and they're really, really close. They're definitely have interventions, they're having meetings, and they're discussing. So they're kind of at the beginning stages, but they're doing intervention, looking at data and making changes. And I think the high school's hard just because there's been change in leadership up there and change in staff and just turnover and things like that. So the high school, definitely assesses kids and they feel like intervention is important, but it's not at the same place as the elementaries, I guess I would say. But
okay, thank you very much.
Yeah. So I got a question from Genevieve. Are we doing both tier 2 and tier 3 problem solving with PLCs, or does tier 3 individual problem solving happen in another structure? Nope, it happens during the exact same time. So we're looking at our data, because remember the teachers have a small group reading time, and so they are doing tier 2 intervention, they're doing tier 3 interventions, and they're making sure that their tier 1 stay where they need to be. And so they teach all the kids, they have to show ownership for all their students. And so when we're looking at the data, we do talk about that. We'll talk about, okay, so how's tier 1 doing? How do we know tier 1's doing good? What data shows that? What about our tier 2s? What are some changes we need to make? Because sometimes we'll have tier 2s that of course move to tier 3, and we have to talk about that. And we'll do that in the data meetings, when we're meeting in the PLCs.
Nora, we also had a request from Holly for you to share some of your SEL information. So her information is there. So I just want to make sure that you saw that as well.
I didn't see it, so good. So yeah, Holly, I will make sure I send it to you. The SEL stuff is very fascinating. I love it. But it'll change your life if you do it.
Thank you. I so appreciate it.
Yep. Okay, I got our email. We're good.
Okay, wonderful. We are almost out of time. Do we have any last minute questions or comments before we end? Well, Nora, this was extremely helpful. Thank you for sharing this process with us. We're always looking for great examples of MTSS practice in the state. And so hopefully take Nora's information down. She's a great resource for all of us.
And I'll type that in the chat here really quick just so you guys have it. So here's my email. I'll just put my email in. There you go.
Wonderful. Thank
All
you,
right, guys.
everyone. Have a great Friday tomorrow.